Hello everyone, welcome to Imprint IAS. I'm Varun Kolar, and today we'll be looking at the fifth chapter, the architecture of the Constitution, its basic features, and the institutions. The idea being that we'll be discussing the various facets from the Constitution in this video, right? And in this video, we'll be learning about the office of the President, the Vice President, the Council of Ministers, the relationship between the President and the Prime Minister, right? We'll be looking at the state legislature and the Parliament. We'll be looking at what are the differences between them. We'll be talking about the Indian civil services and how it has played a role and why it was not dismantled. Right. So let's start. So the chapter number five, the architecture of the Constitution, basic features and the institutions. Now, in our Constitution, there's something very interesting that we have, and this happened by a full bench of the Supreme Court in 1973. So what do you mean by the full bench? So all the judges of the Supreme Court at the time in 1973 passed a majority judgment in Keshwanand Bharati, right? And the idea being that the Constitution is supposed to have a basic structure which can't be altered, right? So what does that mean? In the words of D.D. Basu, and he's a very famous author. In case you haven't read his book, or in case you're preparing for UPSC, I think his book is a must read. Uh, Especially if you have a optional like public administration or political science. So he says that there are certain basic features of the Constitution which cannot be altered in the exercise of powers to amend it under Article 368. Now, this was a huge debate whether the Constitution can be amended, and right, to what extent it can be amended. So what this idea says is that if you amend the Constitution in some basic areas, it would be ultra virus, because it would be tantamount to making a new Constitution, and this can only be done by a new Constituent Assembly. Let's take another example. Justice S.M. Krishna Sikri. Justice S.M. Sikri says these basic features were the supremacy of the Constitution. Uh, and who are they? The Republican and the democratic form of government. Number two, the secular character of the Constitution. Number three, the separation of powers between the legislature, executive, and the judiciary, and the federal structure. Further in time, there were other features which were added. Principle of free and fair elections, the rule of law, the objectives defined in the preamble, judicial review, freedom and dignity of individual, unity and integrity of India, the principle of equality, the concept of social economic justice, the balance between FR and DPSPs, which is mentioned in the Minerva Mill case, the independence of judiciary, and the effective access to justice. Uh, the 42nd Amendment, had actually made, sure that no limitation, right, on the amendment of the Constitution. But as I said, in the Minerva case, it reaffirmed the doctrine of basic structure of the Constitution by holding that judicial review is a basic feature, and which cannot be even taken away by amending the Constitution. So there has been a question on basic structure in UPSC in the years 2013 to 18. Do look into that. Right, we'll be posting that question along with this. Right, have a look and do try this question and answer it. All right, and if you want to get corrected, do write to us at imprintknowledgesolutions@gmail.com. Okay, let's continue. The federal structure or unitary. Now the question normally is whether India is a federal structure or it's unitary. So to quote Granville Austin, right, he says the political structure of the Constitution is so unusual, it is impossible to describe it briefly. He says it can, characterizations such as quasi-federal, statutory decentralization are interesting, but not particularly eliminating. And the members of the assembly themselves refuse to adhere to any theory or dogma about federalism. This basically India had unique problems, and like we have problem of partition and so on. So the problems were not confronted by any other federations in the history. Therefore, they could not be resolved to theory about federalism or a definitive concept, and therefore, federalism in India lacks a definite meaning. The assembly members, drawing on experience of great federations like United States, Canada, Switzerland, and Australia, they pursued the policy of pick and choose, and they thought that okay, let's pick whatever can be suit India. This process produced a new kind of federalism to meet India's peculiar needs. If you think about it, you might have heard of Narendra Modi talking about cooperative federalism, but it's something which was embraced even by the Constituent Assembly, right? Which is cooperative federalism, and it is characterized by interdependence of federal and regional governments without destroying the principle of federalism. And this cooperative federalism was actually reintroduced into the political vocabulary by P. Chidambaram when he was the finance minister of the Front government, United Front government in 1996-98. Then the decision of the Constituent Assembly to have a federal constitution with a strong center was occasioned also by circumstances it was taken. The strong central government was required for handling the situation out of the communal riots, for meeting the food crisis, for settling the refugees, for maintaining national unity and promoting social and economic development. Right? Initially, the Constituent Assembly wanted to have a federal nature, right? But as soon as the partition of India decision was taken, the Mountbatten Plan was announced on 3rd of June 1947. The Constituent Assembly basically quickly moved in the direction of a federation with a strong center. And if you think about that, in Article 1 itself, India is said to be a union of states, and it is seen to be the federation is a union which because it is indestructible. What B. Ambedkar says, right? And the federation was not a result of an agreement by the states to join a federation, which was the case in the United States. All right. So understand the fact that Indian federation has distinctive features. For example, unlike the US, where a person is a citizen of US as well as a state in which he she or resides, in India there is only one Indian citizenship. Now, if this is something I think we can pick and choose here itself, when if you are answering a question which has come in GS2 this year, talking about India and US democracies, right? Do write that question if you get time, right? Uh, okay. Then the constitution also tried to minimize the conflict between union and the states by clearly, having listed powers of each. There's a state list, there's a union list, and there is a concurrent list. So, and it's mentioned if, in the concurrent list, in case there's a conflict between union and the state legislation, the union law shall prevail. Now, one of the criticism of federal India, right, was the fact that uh, there's an overwhelming financial power of the union, and 15th Finance Commission, right, the 14th Finance Commission gave 42% devolution to the states, which was seen to be in the light of cooperative federalism. But there's still the dependence of the states upon the union for granted aids for discharging functions places limits on federalism. Right. So federalism, India is seen to be federal but unitary in structure. Then think about if you're writing a question on this, so what kind of examples you'll give. You can talk about the different type of governments with DMK and ADMK in Tamil Nadu, Telugu Desam in Andhra, we have Shiv Sena in Maharashtra, we have Janata Dal governments in Gujarat and Karnataka, right? BJP in UP, Madras, sorry, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Gujarat, Himachal. So all of these tells you that yes, India is becoming increasing federal. Now, agitations if you think about the recent agitations, we have the Gorkhaland agitation, we have the Telangana agitation, results to, that the federal impulse is alive, right? And interestingly, there was a case which you can actually talk about for federalism. In left front government in West Bengal questioned the right of the BJP government in the center to set a fact-finding scheme to assess the state law and order situation, citing the fact that law and order is a state subject, right? So the constitution at every point of time balances, right, the idea that what India should be. Okay. Then let's talk about what Didi Basu says about the Indian constitution. He says it introduces a system which normally works as a federal system, but there are provisions to convert into a quasi unitary or a quasi federal system under specific circumstances. And this flexibility is purely missionary, purely federal constitutions. So obviously, India is a Indian constitution more advanced than that. So that was about federal nature of India. Let's talk about the institutions of governments now. And the first is the President of India, and if it is from Article that the executive starts in the Indian Constitution. And if you think about the President of India, he's a constitutional head, and in some ways, he's just like the King of England, right? He is the head of the state, but not of the. He represents the nation, but does not rule the nation, right? It is the Prime Minister, the Council of ministers, which is responsible for Parliament. And the if you think about it, India's parliamentary form of government is actually closest to the British system. There's different course of that India has no hereditary monarch, but an elected symbol of state, that is head of state, and that is why India is a republic. Now the question becomes whether we have and what kind of relationship the president has with the prime minister and the cabinet, whether he's a figurehead or he's much more than that. Now the idea is that there have been many political situations which has provided for an activist president. The first of the controversy we had was with Dr. Rajendra Prasad, who had serious reservation on the Hindu Code bill, and he tried, to argue that in September 1951 that the president had a greater role to play. But fortunately, Rajendra Prasad was, the experts argued that, the whole constitutional structure would, upset if the president assumed dictatorial powers. So hence, Rajendra Prasad was persuaded to exercise a limited role, right? Uh, that the convention under which the king acts always on the advice of his ministers will be established in this country, and the president will become a constitutional president in all matters. And this was what he himself expressed during the Constituent Assembly, right? So, but in case there is not a single majority, the president has a potential for activism, and he has done this in 1979 when Neelam Sanjeeva Reddy used discretion in refusing the Moraji Desai request to form a new government, and he basically asked Charan Singh to form a government by seeking a vote of confidence, right? So unstable situation created an opportunity for a president to exercise his discretion, and this has happened many times in 1989, 1991, 1996, right, 1998, and so on, right? So anytime there's a fractured majority, we will get an activist president, it seems. Uh, it is evident that unstable and ambiguous political situations provide ample room for exercise of prudential discretion and potential abuse or misuse of powers, right? And this was also done during the Atal Bihari Vajpayee era, where the President Narayan insisted that he furnish proof in writing that his party did enjoy the support of his allies, right? The other example, obviously, is the president on occasion, out of personal ambition or out of sense of duty to constitution, have exercised discretionary power. The most interesting example is President Jayal Singh, who was the first to use the president power to return a bill to parliament, right? And it was also mentioned that maybe he even tried to discuss with political leaders of the possibility of dismissing Rajiv Gandhi as prime minister after the Bofors scandal. Right. Then there have been, there's a one another thing about the president is something known as the president rule, and there have been so many instances of this being misused. For example, in February 1998, we had Ramesh Mandhari. He dismissed the BJP-led government of Kalyan Singh and swore in another man as the chief minister. The High Court had to reinstate Kalyan Singh, and the government sent a report to the center recommending the dissolution of the assembly and imposition of president rule. Right. So it basically tells you that the idea is that it is very easy for the president rule to be imposed and misused, and this has been done in Arunachal, was done in Uttarakhand, and so on. Right. So idea is that if you think about it, the president, the office of the president has been misused. Uh, then we have a case, that whether does the president have the right to return bills? So he does have the right to return bills, but only once, and it is mentioned in the 44th Amendment that if the Council of the Minister reiterates his position, the president must accept his advice. Uh, there are other areas where the powers of president are clearly defined. These were the discretionary powers of president. There are other discretionary powers regarding tribal areas, etc. But If you're coming back, if a bill is under Article 111, he may withhold his assent if he desires and return it to Parliament for reconsideration. But if both the houses pass it again, he has to, you know, typically give his assent. So, for example, let's say there's a ordinary bill, right? It has to be passed by both the you know Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha, and the president has to basically assent it. But normally, let's take the example of okay, a case something like preventive detention law. Many times that has happened. The president has returned a law like that. But in the case of money bill, he has no discretion and he just has to pass it. And this money bill, idea has been misused by the government in many cases, especially recently in the Aadhaar case. And it has been so sad that even the Supreme Court has not really taken the government to task for this, right? Then the other provision, which is normally misused by the president, was the emergency, and we have to after the emergency was over in 1977. In 1978, we had the 44th Amendment, which made it explicit that the president can declare an emergency only after receiving in writing the decision of the cabinet advising him to make the proclamation, right? And it also changed that the internal rebellion clause was changed in this case. That the president is elected for 5 years and can be removed through impeachment violation. This is an Article 61. He's elected by both the members of, but remember, it is the elected members. The nominated members of parliament are not allowed to vote in the case of the, and each members, whether it's MLA MP, has a single transferable vote and has a value corresponding to the population represented by him, right? And we'll talk about this in much more detail when we talk about Indian polity and we talk about the president's office in detail, right? Okay, so let's stop here today, and this is the part one, and we'll talk about the vice president, other institutions of governance of India in the later part, right? Thank you so much, right here. And do write to us if you have any questions regarding Office of President. We'll be definitely starting a series on polity and on public administration soon. So in that, we'll do in a lot more depth in this whole chapter. Thank you so much.